This video is the first part of a series on my favorite Sonic games. I thought of doing like a ranking of like my top 10 favorites or whatever, but decided against it as I couldn't really place my top 3. And I feel like the best Sonic games deserve more than just a slot in a ranking, at least for now anyways. So instead, I'm going to be doing a series on my favorite Sonic games, starting with Sonic Unleashed. In terms of my favorite Sonic games and the Sonic chronology, Sonic Unleashed is not the earliest example of a Sonic game being one of my favorites. So why are we starting with Sonic Unleashed? Well, Sonic Unleashed was my very first Sonic game. Now, my dad had a Sega Mega Drive and he had Sonic 1 and 2, which I played on his Sega Mega Drive before playing Sonic Unleashed. But those were kind of his Sonic games. This was my first Sonic game, the very first one that was for me. It almost wasn't. My first Sonic game was almost Sonic Heroes, which was on my Christmas list, but my parents told me I could only have one game for Christmas that year, so I picked Incredibles Rise of the Underminer instead. And in some ways, I'm kind of glad I did, because Sonic Unleashed was the game that made me into a Sonic fan, and I don't know if Sonic Heroes would have had that same effect. And that's not like saying anything about the quality of Sonic Heroes yet. I will cover that game at a later date. Not in this series, but I will cover that game. It's more to do with kind of right place, right time, you know, like Sonic Unleashed had such a good effect on me that I don't know if I would trust even one of my other favorite Sonic games to have that same effect on me. But even then, I very nearly almost didn't buy Sonic Unleashed. On the Christmas of 2008, I had just gotten an Xbox 360, and I was gonna trade in a few old PS2 games to try and get the Xbox 360 version of Spider-Man 3 the game after being a little disappointed by the PS2 version back when it came out. However, I had the option, trade in the games and get money off of Spider-Man 3 the game, which wasn't even in stock at the time, or I could just get Sonic Unleashed with the games that I traded in. And it was my dad that persuaded me to go for Sonic Unleashed, a game that changed my life. Good call, Pops. So Sonic Unleashed released in 2008, and if that doesn't feel that long ago, let's just remind you that this was the year that President Obama was elected. So what we're doing right now is gaming in the Obama years, everybody. What a time to be alive. So Sonic Unleashed boasts quite a cinematic story. One of the first things you're greeted to is an incredible opening cutscene that feels like you're watching a Pixar movie. Beautifully rendered, really well directed. And the story revolves around Doctor Eggman wanting to harness the energy of Dark Gaia, a creature that lives at the core of the Earth, to power Eggman Land, his dystopian amusement park. So he cracks the planet wide open, exposing everybody to the minions and side effects of Dark Gaia, including Sonic transforming into a Werehog, and it's up to Sonic and his new friend Chip to install the Chaos Emeralds into Gaia temples to restore the planet and the power of the Chaos Emeralds. Sonic Unleashed has a lot of different gameplay styles, but there are two main ones. There's your basic, typical Sonic, and then you have his Werehog transformation. But there are a few others, such as the Tornado Defense, or the more RPG-style gameplay of running around the hub worlds and talking to people. Now, as I've said, this was my first Sonic game. This was the Sonic game that made me a Sonic fan. This was the Sonic game that made me want to engage with Sonic's community and other Sonic fans, so I was pretty shocked at the time to find out that Sonic Unleashed was not a very well-received game, with all kinds of criticisms leveled against it, varying from perfectly valid to just downright poor faith.
There's one thing you should know about Sonic Unleashed before spending your hard-earned money on it. It's a big piece of garbage.
This was also where I learned that gaming journalism isn't a real profession. Sorry, Stuart. Wink. Not only that, I was also quite surprised to discover that Sonic's reputation wasn't a very good one at the time. The last mainline Sonic game was considered to be one of the worst, and the Sonic series was considered to be in a state of decline even before that. All of this came as quite a shock to me because I really loved Sonic Unleashed. However, years later, people are coming back to this game. It's developed developed something of a cult following, with even some of this game's harshest critics rethinking and revising their opinions of it. When the game came out in 2008, IGN gave the game a 4.5 out of 10, declaring it bad. Yet in 2022, it made it onto IGN's list of top 10 Sonic games. Now, admittedly, IGN's a company, and the review was made by a person that no longer works there, but even so, this turnaround for the game's reputation is something worth looking at, and I always saw the greatness in Sonic Unleashed. Sonic Unleashed had quite a few unique selling points. It's a globe-trotting adventure. You go all around Sonic's world to different continents. Sonic has his werewolf transformation, which comes with all kinds of new abilities. But the best thing about this game was the basic Sonic gameplay style. It was the vanilla part of this metaphorical ice cream sundae which tasted the best. So in 3D, Sonic had a pretty concrete gameplay style that was established in Sonic Adventure. And throughout the years, we basically saw evolutions of that core gameplay style. Whether it was accentuating his athleticism a little more, or adding friends to the mix, or just ruining it, Sonic had a pretty concrete gameplay style in 3D. And Sonic Unleashed was the first of the mainline 3D Sonic games to really shake that up, completely redefining how this character plays. See, to me, Sonic games are a lot like roller coasters. Sonic is slow to move up hills, but the momentum gained from moving back down those hills can carry you around loop-de-loops and all kinds of other thrilling set pieces. It's all about that momentum, and the original Sonic games are much more reminiscent of those lift hill roller coasters. Where Sonic Unleashed redefines this, it's more reminiscent of a launch start roller coaster, where rather than gradually building up that momentum, you just go full speed ahead immediately. And it's all about that feeling of acceleration. You remember the old Sonic cartoon, you remember the theme song, he's the fastest thing alive. Sonic Unleashed takes that literally. And the challenge comes with reacting to obstacles and navigating the stages at such a high speed. This was a big departure from what previous Sonic games were. Playing as Sonic was no longer like playing as a pinball in a platforming stage, but like playing as a race car in a platformer stage, which I think was such a smart way of redefining Sonic's gameplay style for the next generation, making it something that feels truly impressive. And there's nothing quite like it. I think the closest I can think of were the dash stages from the Incredibles video game. But Sonic Unleashed is so much more elaborate. However, Sonic Unleashed was not the first Sonic game to allow the player to feel like a speeding bullet. That honor would go to Sonic Rush, a 2D Nintendo DS title. This game released in 2005, so it was releasing opposite games like Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, Sonic Heroes. It came out around that kind of time. And a consensus among a lot of Sonic fans was that Sonic Rush was one of the better Sonic games to release in that time, and that they wanted Sonic games to feel more like that. So it made sense that Sonic Unleashed would be the first game to implement that style of gameplay into the core series for the first time in 3D. And it's safe to say that this was a huge success, as it was most commonly cited as the best part of the game, and I completely agree. This was an important change, one that was integral to the success of Sonic Unleashed. That unrivaled sense of thrill. If you were to take Sonic Unleashed and replace the boost gameplay style segments with something more akin to the adventure games, or more akin to the momentum style gameplay seen in the classics, I don't think it would have worked. Nothing against those gameplay styles, but it definitely wouldn't have worked for this game. See, Sonic Unleashed is quite an uneven experience. The game takes about, on a whole, 6 hours to complete, but only around 30 to 40 minutes of that playtime are spent in the core boost Sonic gameplay style, and around half of that gameplay time is spent backtracking, which means that yes, you will get to replay those boost levels, but in terms of the overall content here, there is around about only 40 minutes to, if I'm being generous, an hour of those boost levels, with a sizable chunk of gameplay being spent as Sonic's Werehog transformation, which draws its inspiration from the original God of War games. It's all about brawling and combos, but that's not all. More of the precise platforming you'd find in in a classic Sonic game can be found here. That's not to say that the core Sonic gameplay stages were completely devoid of platforming, far from it, but it was much more about reflexes and reaction time, whereas this is much more the conventional platforming style, much more precise. What Sonic Unleashed had effectively done was taken the thrill factor of the conventional Sonic gameplay style, that speed, and turned it into more of a set piece in a bigger picture. Think of a Spider-Man movie. You spend the majority of your time in those movies with Peter Parker, and the web-swinging wall-crawling action is more kept to action set pieces. Now imagine that done with Sonic's speedy gameplay style. And it's understandable because those levels have to be pretty long in order to accommodate for Sonic's speedy gameplay style, because he can cover a lot of ground in a very short space of time. The boost gameplay style is the best style to juxtapose with the Werehog. And if you had a slightly slower, more methodical Sonic gameplay style, like the one seen in previous games, it definitely wouldn't juxtapose quite as well with the Werehog. You wouldn't get that sense that these are the thrilling set pieces, and it would end up feeling wholly secondary to the Werehog. That's just my take. You can feel free to disagree with it, but that's just how I see it. I think the shift to boost gameplay was definitely integral, at the very least, to Sonic Unleashed. And the idea that the majority of the game is spent doing more the platforming from the original Sonic games, and that the speed is relegated to certain set pieces, it relies on those set pieces being done really well, but it is a move that did make a lot of sense at the time. And I think that on a whole, it was handled really well. You can make cases for saying that the Werehog gameplay style doesn't really belong there, so much as the God of War style combat doesn't really belong there. You could maybe make the case of saying combat should have just been like a one-hit thing like the conventional Sonic game, and that the platforming should have been the thing that was focused on by the Werehog. Others would say that the Werehog shouldn't be there altogether, and that the game should strictly be those daytime Sonic stages. And I can see validity in both of those arguments, but I must say I do like the Werehog. It's something that I'm glad Sega hasn't relied upon, and I'm glad that Sega haven't revisited, but I do like this gameplay style. See, Sonic Unleashed has an EXP system, so you can level up both Sonic in his regular form and his Werehog form. Now, I'm gonna say this, I think the Werehog is too depowered from the get-go. I think that there is a very high skill ceiling, and it feels good to get there, but I think that floor is just a little bit too low as well. You don't have to level him up too much to get to a point of having fun with it, but the fact that when it starts off, the Werehog doesn't really feel any kind of powerful definitely leads to some negative first impressions, and I feel like if he were a bit more powered up from the get-go, people would have a bit of a different reaction to the Werehog and in turn Sonic Unleashed. Another problem is the turning circle on him as well. There's very imprecise turning for the Werehog, which means that some of the more elaborate platforming sections can end up just becoming hell because the Werehog just turns so widely that he falls off of balance beams and other precise platforming elements. No, Sonic Unleashed is not perfect. And while the boost gameplay is thrilling, it's safe to say that even that element improved in later games such as Sonic Generations and to a small extent Sonic Colors. So what is it then that makes Sonic Unleashed my favorite? Well, unlike later installments, the connective tissue in this game comes in the form of hub worlds. Each location in this game has its very own locale that you can just stroll around and do as you please. No, you can't go super fast in these areas even as the regular daytime Sonic, but getting to know the people of this world, the people that I am protecting and saving, knowing their cuisine, seeing that each nation has its very own culture, and seeing these cultures cross over as different residents visit the different locations, it's a fantastic backdrop. It makes this world feel lived in a way that no Sonic game has achieved since. Having shops in these hub worlds where you can buy foods to give Sonic a boost in EXP is not only rewarding but contributes a great deal to the world building. Even better yet, if you feed them to Chip, you get Chip's opinions on the food. This is a nice detail that not everyone will appreciate and not everyone will necessarily even use, but I'm glad it's here. In this story, Sonic feels like someone that the player can actually trust and count on. His too cool for school character characterization is offset by Chip's immaturity, giving Sonic a big brother status that was kind of grown out of for Tails come Sonic Adventure 2, meaning that big brother little brother dynamic is back in full force, with a new character that has a lot to learn about Sonic's way of life. Unlike a lot of the games that came after it, Sonic Unleashed feels like it actually recognizes that these characters can grow and change based on their surroundings. In the opening cutscene, we see Sonic's trademark attitude, but once Doctor Eggman splits the world apart, Sonic becomes very serious, and we see much more of his selfless side come out as he helps Chip revive his memories. It's nice to see a more mature Sonic. There are also a couple of moments in this story where Sonic and Chip reflect on the adventure they've had. One of the best cutscenes in this game comes after Chip gets his memories back, and Sonic and Chip take a moment to reflect on the adventure they've had. The story is really well paced here, allowing these characters to feel like they're actually reacting to things around them, rather than just going through the motions. In 2010, 2 years after the release of Sonic Unleashed, musician Alex Day released a song, Sonic Doesn't Need a Story. A song expressing the sentiment that Sonic should go back to basics, just Sonic stopping Dr. Eggman from turning animals into robots, that there's too many characters and too much lore. When it comes to this sentiment, I couldn't disagree more. Yes, there is such a thing as too much. Look at, say, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, and yeah, there's a little too much going on with that story there. But the story, the lore, the characters is the framing device that takes Sonic Unleashed's gameplay, which is generally not as good as some of the games that came later, for example Sonic Generations, and makes the game better. It's the story, the lore, the characters, the world building, which makes Sonic Unleashed, in my opinion, a better experience than, say, Sonic Generations. Knowing that the adventure that they are embarking on actually matters to these characters is a huge motivating factor in playing the game, which I don't even really need much of a motivating factor to play. I'm in it for the thrills at the end of the day, but I don't think it's good to see a game take that for granted, and the sentiment that Sonic doesn't really need a story was echoed by a lot of the fan base, eventually leading us to games like Sonic Colors, where the story took on more of a childish tone and more of a back seat. There's also kind of this sentiment across social media that Sonic stories have no right to take anything seriously. That no, because Sonic looks like Mickey Mouse, he should act like Mickey Mouse. They should not be doing these Dragon Ball-esque stories. They shouldn't feel like shonen animes. They shouldn't have life or death stakes. And that's ridiculous, because that entire comment comes purely from the perspective that this character looks like a Mickey Mouse, therefore he should act like a Mickey Mouse. When Sonic has his own appeal separate from Mickey Mouse, even if he does resemble that style of character design. Sonic Unleashed gets the tone just right. You've got life or death stakes. You've got a global scale. You've got people that are depending on you, and you meet those people. You actually get to see those people and their cultures. You actually get to know them. You know how they look, how they talk, what they eat, but the game also manages to have some humor as well, some more cartoony elements, which do die down as the stakes grow higher. There is genuinely good storytelling going on here, and I think using Pixar movies such as Ratatouille as a source of inspiration, which is clear as day in this game, was a really smart move. Ultimately, this story is not winning Best Script at the Oscars or anything like that, but it is one of Sonic Unleashed's defining factors as a framing device for all of that gameplay. And I think it's why after games like Sonic Colors, Sonic Lost World, Sonic Forces, Sonic Generations, people came back to Sonic Unleashed. People wanted more of this style, and I think it's why, thank the heavens above, Sega have returned to more of this style with the recent entry Sonic Frontiers. Not only that, coming back to Sonic Unleashed feels so good because the game has barely aged a day. The overall presentation is still good. Sonic Unleashed remains one of the better looking Sonic games because of how good the art direction is. Once again, taking cues from Pixar was an excellent move. The only downside being that for how good this game looks, the performance sucks. if you're playing it on the original native hardware such as the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. However, the game has since been upgraded to 60 frames per second on the Xbox Series S and X, meaning that you are getting the best version of this game if you own those consoles. I very recently replayed the game on my Xbox Series S and I had a fantastic time. Sonic Unleashed is not a perfect game by any means. There are some serious control issues. Some elements of the brawler gameplay are just at odds with themselves. The tornado defense stages are pretty laughable, and the progression gating is weighted just a little too highly. But by the time the credits roll, by the time Bowling for Soup is playing, and Sonic's little Polaroids are going up on screen, none of it matters, because in spite of some bumps along the road, you've just been on an adventure, and that is a feeling that Sonic Unleashed absolutely nails. It's a feeling that Sonic Unleashed absolutely excels at, has managed to capture better than any Sonic game before it, and better than every Sonic game since. I think what made Sonic Unleashed strike such a chord with me when I was younger, the reason it turned me into a Sonic fan, is it felt like I had actually been on this journey. I didn't just play Sonic Unleashed, I experienced it. And that's what separates a game like Sonic Unleashed from a game like Sonic Colors to me. Sonic Colors is a game you play. It's a more even experience, but it feels more like I'm going through the motions. Sonic Unleashed, on the other hand, is a game that it feels like I'm actually experiencing. And that is why it is one of my favorite Sonic games. There's also a Wii version, and I'm gonna cover that someday. But for now, this is Sonic Unleashed, and this is why Sonic Unleashed is one of my favorites. What do you guys think? Is Sonic Unleashed one of your favorites? What are your favorite Sonic games, and why? Throw it down in the comments below. I can't wait to read it. And until the next time, guys, take care, take it easy, have a happy holidays, and I'll catch you next time. I say, you've made it to the end of the video! Congrats! No, but seriously, thanks a bunch for watching. And just now, I'll be extending a special thanks to the patrons in the $10 tier, who are Adam Myers, Ken K, Legendary Ray Ray, Mr. SP, Sergio, That Jordo, and Where's Arnold? What an amazing and generous bunch of people. Thank you guys so much for your support. And if you want to join the ranks of these amazing people right here, the link to my Patreon is in the description below. Guys, these are not the easiest times in the world financially, so every little bit you folks are donating is doing wonders. I really would love to be able to do YouTube as a proper fully fledged career someday. It might just be a pipe dream, but maybe you guys can prove some people wrong. But of course, if donations aren't your thing, then, well, it means plenty to me that you just hit that cute little subscribe button over there. I didn't mean hit that way. Well, that's me done for the day. Thanks a whole bunch for your support, and have a fantastic day. I'm gonna see you so soon.